Hi, welcome to the Etiquette Show, our entree to the world of culture, gender, sexuality, tradition, business, and so much more. Hi, I'm Regina Gershman.
And I'm Dr. Sam Dubé. Together, we're going to take you on an extraordinary journey with engaging people from around the world, starting from right here in Ottawa, the capital of Canada. Hello, Dr. Sam Dubé here once again for the Etiquette Show, and our interview with the New York City naturopath, Dr. Ivy Branin, went so well, and we had so much more we wanted to discuss that this is actually part two. So part one has already happened, and now we're into part two. So Dr. Branin, thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Branin is a naturopath who practices in the West Village in New York City. She gets a lot of MD physician referrals. She has a particular interest in women's health, and she's been very active during the COVID-19 pandemic. We are in middle of March 2021, and welcome to the Etiquette Show. Thank you so much for joining us once again, Ivy.
Thank you so much again for having me, Sam.
So last time we left off, we were talking about air quality indoors and what people can do to manage that. Now, the elephant in the room here regarding air quality, I'm going to touch upon it. No, I'm going to blast it open. Masking. Does not masking affect our air quality when we go outside wearing a mask into public places? And what's the naturopathic take on that? And I'll just preface this with, Dr. Rashid Buttar talked a lot about the potential histotoxicity of wearing a mask, consistently breathing in things like, our own bacteria, increasing the CO2 levels, oxygen saturation dropping. I mean, we know that if you carry staph on your skin and you cut yourself, you can get a massive staph infection. So there's bacteria all over, and that's just sitting on our skin, potentially causing an almost leprosy-like infection. What about consistently breathing in our own our bacteria? Is this a legitimate fear? Is there science to back this up? Please comment.
I feel this is a very controversial topic.
Absolutely. You know me.
And so, definitely we have to think about safety. And of course, everybody is different when it comes to, their breathing capability, people that are prone to things like asthma or have any kind of distortion in breathing. So what I would say, as far as at least guidelines when it comes to masks and wearing masks, definitely making sure that you're cleaning your masks more often than not. And it's interesting. So, because again, my practice is mostly women and younger women. I work a lot with acne. So the most common complaint about masks is increase in acne, or what we call maskne.
Yeah.
And so what I found in my practice that has been the most beneficial is, besides obviously cleaning masks often, is using silk masks. And silk masks, first of all, have been shown to be very, very effective in preventing the spread over other fibers. And one of the big things is because they're hydrophobic versus hydrophilic. So when we're thinking what is the big risk factor when it comes, or the spread is water droplets. So you definitely want to have a fabric that's going to prevent the spread of water droplets. But the other big thing is they are more naturally breathable, plus also one of the big reasons why people were having more breakouts in association with the masks is a lot of them are very irritating. So the silk masks tend to be less irritating. So for the most part, I feel getting anywhere from 5 to 7 silk masks that you're washing regularly. I guess when it comes to, again, I'm always thinking, at least for myself, risk costs analysis, or what are the benefits, what are the what are not. And so, definitely when it comes to, there's no way around it. If you're in an environment that requires you to wear a mask, you have to wear a mask, like whether you're taking public transportation, you're going to the grocery store. I mean, I think the situation is a bit different here in the US than it is in Canada, where most businesses are up and running, but with restrictions and specifically around mask wearing. But I would say, like, if you have the opportunity to be in situations where you don't necessarily have to wear a mask, I feel like I'm a little bit nervous to even say that, because that could be really, I feel almost anything I say around COVID could be massively misinterpreted.
Yes.
And so all I have to say is just what I know. And
what we try to do up here is, for instance, if we're away from people and we're outside, you can take the mask off. And so we try to breathe as much as we can outside, but then when we approach a public place, we put the mask on prior to entering. So that we're masked that way. Is that the same in New York City?
I think, well, it's interesting because, like, there's two different layers to this. Almost like there's different layers to the actual physical mask. Partly the way people comport themselves has to do with what is regulated, but also what is the, I guess, the cultural norm of the neighborhood. So there are neighborhoods in that the cultural norm is actually to not wear the mask at all. I'm not going to actually say what neighborhoods those are. And then there are other neighborhoods where the cultural norm is to wear the mask no matter what, even like you're like, I feel like it's almost like that same conundrum. It's like 1 o'clock in the morning. You're in your car. There's a red light. There's no cars around. Do you stay or do you go?
Right.
So it's sort of like a little bit of like an ethical conundrum. But again, when we think about besides the mask, we have another regulation when it comes to social distancing, and this is the 6 feet rule. So in theory, if you are outside and no one is around you, or even if there are people around you, but they're beyond 6 feet, one could theorize that one might not necessarily have to wear a mask. Then we also think about probability. We're outside, maybe everyone is like 10 feet from us. Do they even have COVID? What are some of the risks involved? This is, I mean, again, it's very, very controversial. But I mean, for myself, I feel if I'm outside and no one is around or no one is really that close to me, having even a break, even if I always bring my mask no matter what, because you don't know what opportunity or what's going to happen. But I personally feel comfortable taking off my mask, whether it's like briefly or the other thing. I remember early on during the pandemic, there was it was actually based, I think it was either on cold research or flu research, just even the idea of closing, like basically holding one's breath. While in having, like, if somebody sneezed, if you had your, like even if they were closed, but you were holding your breath, that actually could prevent the transmission. And so potentially, I mean, again, like, this is very controversial. I don't know if I would even advocate anyone trying this, but potentially only holding one's breath if someone is kind of like entering your 6 feet sphere could potentially prevent, contracting COVID. But again, this is all very controversial. So
yeah, and the thing is, I'm concerned with other vectors of transmission. So for instance, wearing a mask is one thing, but we know the viral particles are way too small. It's like throwing sand at a chain link fence. Basically, it's like the viral particles can pass through the fabric masks like nothing. It's the water droplets or the moisture droplets impregnated with the virus that get stopped by the mask. And hence, if you're coughing and you're propelling the virus through these water droplets, they get stopped or filtered with the mask, and so you're protecting people. That's the theory, right? When you're wearing,
that's the big thing, is like when you wear the mask, you're more likely protecting others. And I actually think the reason why there's the potential decreased transmission or acquiring if you wear the mask, I think the big thing is because you're not touching your face.
Well, you see, that's just what I was about to bring up. So you go to the grocery store, right, and you're touching all the produce, feeling which avocado is the best avocado, and then you rub under your mask, you're doing this, and you're inoculating your hand, and then you're inoculating the avocado, and then someone comes and touches it, and they inoculate themselves that way. I think that's probably a bigger danger. than possibly inhaling, because we know that the majority of people that are testing positive are asymptomatic. And asymptomatic transmission, according to Chinese and the studies data taken in Florida, showed it basically doesn't happen. So I think there's other modes of transmission, right? And I know you're familiar with the evidence as well. So this is a big controversial point, and I don't want to belabor it too much. We have a lot more that I'd like to talk to you about, Ivy. Suffice to say that you've made some really good recommendations regarding improving your own air quality if you do wear the mask, if you do go into public places, because we're not going to debate whether or not we should be wearing masks or not here. I don't think this is the time and the place with this interview, but certainly you made some good suggestions. Now, in our previous interview, our part 1, we talked about diet, and we actually talked for quite a while, almost 40 minutes on that, and you addressed various things, including the need for vegetables and particularly the influence or the importance of organic vegetables. We talked about deficiencies that can occur and the importance of getting appropriate nutrients, in particular, vitamin D, vitamin C, zinc. And you talked about using probiotics, and in particular for women in terms of their vaginal flora as well. And we talked about the mood being influenced by probiotics as well, and omega-3 fatty acids. And there was just so much there, and these things are all interrelated. There's so many other things we haven't talked about. We segued into being indoors and the environment, the differences in the environment. But let's talk now about exercise. And I know you and I have had this discussion in the past. You're an avid ballet aficionado, shall we say. I don't want to go out and say you're a ballerina, but maybe you are a ballerina. But I know that you yourself are taking ballet lessons online. So can you comment as to the challenges of regular exercise during the pandemic?
Well, I'd say overall, at least like what I can really mostly speak to what I've seen in my practice, and a lot of the blogs that I've written actually have been influenced by patients and things that they've struggled with. And I think the big, I have to say, it's interesting. Like, I don't like to label certain classes of people, but I would have to say it's sort of the pandemic kind of differentiated those that just were like haphazardly doing exercise or like kind of like reluctantly versus those that were like really committed. So like definitely something I've seen both from the dietary side and the exercise side. Those that just either they had already established a practice or it was like something that they knew was like one of their if something is non-negotiable for you, you're going to find a way to do it.
Yes.
And like for me, my ballet practice and is one of those non-negotiable things. So I was really grateful that many of the studios locally in New York started offering video like via Zoom or YouTube. And so I was first going with Mark Morris, and then eventually my main teacher, Svi Gothiner, was doing a live class and still is doing a live class via Zoom. And like the only thing I would say, my only barrier to the class is like I have a lot smaller space, and so it definitely is making a different class, but I'm still getting all the same benefits that I was when I was taking the class. And then I've actually in the past, I guess 6 months, I have been working with a personal trainer once a week, and mostly because I lost all my upper body strength. Right. So that's where I'm a little bit haphazard in my own routine. So for those, again, like that, it was not so built in. It was not so important. It was a lot easier for them to make every excuse in the book to let things fall off. But the one thing is that, like now though, more than ever, and I think after a period of time, specifically now that we're pretty much only inside, some of these things actually can be even easier than ever before. Most of us New Yorkers did a lot of time on the subway, lots and lots of traveling. And so our schedules have actually kind of simplified a bit more. And the work structure has changed. So one could actually start fitting some fitness in the middle of the day or a different part of the day where they couldn't before. And whether that is working I'll have to say, there's something very motivating about working with a personal trainer. I do not like lifting weights. I know it's like an important thing for me, and I literally will tell my personal trainer every time. I'm like, I hate this. But I know
you see that, boys and girls? Someone who doesn't like lifting weights, but they do it anyway. Okay? I've been preaching this for decades.
Yeah, like I totally didn't even. I think I even tried to do it on my own. I'm like, yeah, I need to work with Debbie. I can't do it on my own. But the nice thing is, like, now there's so much. Most personal trainers now are working virtually. There are a lot of virtual classes, and also for all types of budgets. Many things are completely free on YouTube. Yes. Amazingly enough. And even getting the equipment, just ordering it online. There's a lot of things that it doesn't have to be. I mean, I have just like in my home right now, just 1, 2, and I graduated to 5-pound weight. So I'm actually lifting 5 pounds now.
It's all relative.
Right. So I have my little setup. But the big part I would say is really building it in. And again, I feel that some of these struggles probably were even relevant during pre-pandemic, and then just making it even just having any additional barrier to exercise is going to make that so much worse. But I think the best thing is, really the best advice I really can have is just get started, even if it's very small. I mean, often, like with my patients, I will be, even if it's like 10 minutes, 20 minutes, taking a walk outside, then, you're getting the extra benefit also of some fresh air, you're getting some sunshine. Now that we're having longer days, people can take more advantage of that. Biking. I mean, New York, we have like a lot, even again, though we are limited in some way because of the pandemic, we have a lot of these, we have all these parks. We have a city bike system that people can use, and they do, at least they claim that you're doing a really good job at cleaning bikes. Also, now we have ice skating, which is kind of another option. And
you're speaking to someone living in the city with the longest skating rink in the world. So, yeah, we're big on that.
There's definitely a lot of resources, but the big thing, just like any of these healthy habits, is finding a way of building it in and making it a non-negotiable. Another big thing is that we are sitting more than ever, probably. Yes. And again, a lot of New Yorkers, maybe they didn't even go to the gym. They didn't really have an exercise routine, but they probably were getting like 10,000 steps in a day, just because New Yorkers are always on the move. Like, there's no way around it. This city, unfortunately, was not built for people that cannot walk. It's just not, it sounds like, but it's a very much a mobile city. Yes. So now that we're very much in lockdown, finding ways to stand more, whether it's, purchasing a standing desk, creating your own. I have never purchased a standing desk, though I make standing desks all the time. I do all my charting standing. Oh, okay. I do a lot of my blogging standing. So getting standing desks, or if you really don't want to do that, even getting one of these huge exercise balls, so at least you are somewhat engaging your core, can also influence, have some positive influence. But yeah, the most important thing is really building it in. And exercise is so important when we think about not just for like looking hot.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But also our mood, our sleep, our digestion. We think about peristalsis, digestion, immunity, longevity, sexual function. I mean,
movement is medicine, right? Movement is medicine. And you're preaching to the choir. I'm a strength coach, and one of the things I do, and I still do, is I coach online. I coach trainers online. So I'm a master trainer, and I work with a lot of strength athletes. So, but there's times when I don't want to go. I got 5,000 pounds of stuff in my basement, and I don't want to go in the basement. But I'll tell you this, one of the biggest boons, I think, or one of the biggest sayings, is that action precedes motivation. So you were saying you just got to do it, right? Like, just do it like the logo. you just go and you do something. Just do one thing. Do one push-up. Do one sit-up. Walk up one flight of stairs, and you'll find you can't stop there. It's like eating that one Dorito, right? So it's like, don't think that motivation is going to come, because it will never come. If you're waiting for motivation, it may never come. What you got to do is you just got to get up and do it. Turn your brain off. Don't try and rationalize not doing it. Just do it, but do one little thing. Don't have a 0 day. Never allow a 0 day to go by. Just do one little thing, and that can set up the momentum, right? Because you may, and as soon as I get in the basement, if I start warming up, it's like a switch flips in my head, and all of a sudden I'm in my element, because I'm a gym rat deep down inside, right? And you love ballet, and maybe you don't want to get in front of the Zoom call right away. You know what I mean? Like, do you have to motivate yourself to get in front of it, or you just go? It's like, I know it's going to be good for me. Boom, I'm there.
Oh, ballet. Well, ballet is like my joy.
Passion free. Okay.
It's like kind of like, I get my only, and it's something I'm actually trying to work on, is one, getting on for the, like, a little bit before, just to like get into the groove.
Yes.
Versus like trying to fit in every single little work thing I need to do before. And then the other thing that I'm continuously trying to work on is turning off everything else and really allowing my ballet practice to be the only thing I'm doing. So when my teacher's demonstrating something, that doesn't mean it's time for me to like text someone or email someone. Right. I'm not perfect. And like, I really do need to turn off my gadgets. And when I do have a better experience. But, so those are, I think, more like the, the struggles.
Yeah. And I think something that, is fairly ubiquitous are stairs, right? Like even if you live in an apartment, take the stairs. I mean, that's resistance training.
No one else is taking them, so they're probably really safe.
That's right. And the fundamental resistance or weight we all have at our disposal is body weight. So like you were saying, there's lots of good videos out there. There's lots of information out there on body weight training or partial body weight training. And this is something I found there's a much greater demand for recently, with people being, isolated, gyms shutting down, people not wanting to go back to gyms, people being fed up with gyms going out of business, and people still having memberships to said gyms. There's a lot where I can't really see us going back to normal.
No.
Really can't. Right. And it's frightening in a way. It's almost like an infrastructure is being laid to prepare for, COVID-20, COVID-21, COVID-22, or anything else that would cause us to potentially lock down. And I don't know if I'm a fan. I don't know if this is the best way to handle this. All right, let's move on. Another topic that you mentioned that often goes without a lot of discussion is mindfulness. And so for many people, mindfulness means meditation. And in one of your blogs, you mentioned meditation might be a little heavy duty for many people. So I'm recommending breath work. So can you talk a little bit about breath work? My experience with breath work, I've had numerous types of breath work, from focusing on the breath for a meditative experience all the way to Stanislav Grof's holotropic breath work in the 90s. That was wow, just wow. And I won't go into it here, but can you talk to us about your idea of breath work with regards to mindfulness?
Sure. And when we think about mindfulness, and I think a lot of people get very confused, specifically when we think about mindfulness in regards to, say, meditation. It's not necessarily that the goal is absence of thought or achievement of that, or having like kind of like a blank. It's much more, the goal is gaining focus and ways of helping to train the mind. Because every second we're having all kinds of thoughts, and a lot of those thoughts are garbage. And so the more that we can kind of differentiate between helpful thoughts, non-helpful thoughts, how much we actually can have the ability to even, perhaps like the first thought that comes out of our mind, we have no control of, but we can kind of we can develop more control over what are some of the thoughts that come after it, or recognizing kind of like one of the terms that we often talk about, like, for example, in Buddhism, there's like this idea of delusions, and that everything that we're experiencing is coming from our mind, but is it really always like reality based? And we can even think about, like, here in Europe, we have a lot of crazy people, specifically on the subway, that are like screaming at fairies that don't exist. Well, we're kind of experiencing the same thing.
Right.
and I mean, that could be a whole other discussion. And with, meditation, I mean, is one of the techniques that one can use to help to really develop that, awareness of mind, awareness of focus. But I have found, as you mentioned before, that, for people that are very new to these types of practice, meditation can be extremely overwhelming and can almost like be more anxiety producing. And the other thing about mindfulness practice, that it is not necessarily it can kind of like have you come off the ledge of anxious or stress, but the better application for these practices is prevention, because it does increase resilience. So these things that typically might bother other people, they don't tend to bother us as much the more that we practice. So when we get that email from our boss, when we encounter an experience or have a conversation that's troubling with our partner, that we can still remain focused, calm, make really good decisions, make some, stay in reality. And I like things like breathwork because it is a little bit more accessible for most people, because it is it is a way of focusing, and you are basically bringing your mind to the breath, but it is more of an engaged activity. And so I find that it's often much more accessible to patients. The one that I use most often is what I either call pyramid breath or a 3-part breath. I'm not going to go too much into the details of it, but mostly that as you're doing, you're going through 3 types of breath, and you're adding a slight pause into the exhalation, and increasing it. And the idea is that when our exhalation is longer than our inhalation, it naturally actually puts us into a parasympathetic state. And we're going to be in the sympathetic state many times, and unfortunately most of us actually just live in the sympathetic state. We don't even know what the parasympathetic state is. So parasympathetic, rest and digest, and sympathetic is very much like our fight or flight. And so this is a great technique of bringing us more often into the parasympathetic state. And that breath work in particular, I'll usually have patients practice quite often so that they're familiar with it. But you could also, once you familiarize yourself with that practice, you could use it for these times of agitation, or even if you're struggling with like restlessness specifically at night, or feeling a little bit agitated at night and having difficulty going to bed. If you're familiar with the practice, it can be very beneficial. But kind of similar to the meditation, that if you've never done the practice and you're anxious and you try to do a breath practice, it might have the tendency of causing more anxiety, whether it's because you're like, wait, what was I supposed to do again? Wait, was it inhale, out, and then, or it's not working fast enough, or this other, these reactions. I'm not to say that it would not work, but just from my experience, they definitely are better when it comes to if you've been regularly familiar with the practice.
Oh, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, my own experience, I learned transcendental meditation way back in the day, and I learned the kids technique, which is a walking technique focusing on the movement of your tongue and a mantra. But I have to admit, I got off the bandwagon for many years, and then coming back and then using the mantra technique, it's like I wasn't ready to get back into it. It's like I got so preoccupied with this mantra and then all the intrusive thoughts, and then I was just so fatigued I'd fall asleep. And so I couldn't agree with you more that meditation can be overwhelming. And there's so many different kinds, focusing on the breath, a mantra, a certain body movement, a certain posture, this sort of thing. But the idea is to be mindful of the present, and to connect with the timelessness, right? To connect with the timelessness. And Dr. Joe Dispenza, the chiropractor doing the work, and becoming supernatural, all this. I remember watching him in a movie, I guess it was about 2002, What the Bleep Do We Know? It was very fascinating, because I'd met many of the people that had been interviewed in that movie. I was very much into the whole consciousness movement back in the 90s. And he's interviewed, and he's actually done a lot of research in this area on altering your consciousness and getting in touch with the timeless state of us, not being so aware of the space, but getting into the timelessness and then focusing in, or rather tapping that infinite possibility, the undifferentiated field of infinite probability and possibility, as we could call it, or as they call it in Brain Symbol and Experience, the sea of infinite possibility. So this is the idea of the mindfulness, right? Is getting in touch with this, and then hopefully, having that manifest in our lives, right? That this where we don't concern ourselves with the material as much. Anyway, I ramble as I am wont to do, but thank you for that. Are there, we're talking about mindfulness, we can seed into rest and recuperation. So I know that, the isolation, the breaking of the routine, many people not going to work, and lacking structure, strangely enough, because you mentioned structure in your blog. And I do want to, and if you feel it's appropriate to talk about it now, please feel free to do so. But the lack of that structure affecting everything, from eating to, I have students who literally have reversed their time in the day. You know what I mean? It's like they're sleeping in the daytime and they're awake at night because there was no incentive. They've got pre-recorded lectures. They got no incentive to stay up during the daytime. So they become more and more nocturnal, right? And of course, this is not necessarily the best sleep, right? So can you comment to rest and recuperation, and or if you want to talk about structure, feel free to do so.
Well, I'm a big advocate of structure, and I think sometimes we misinterpret structure as restriction, or I want to be free. I want to just do whatever I want, act being an adult, I'm going to live out my 5-year-old's fantasy. I'm just going to eat whatever I want. I'm just going to it doesn't really work very well. First of all, as I mentioned, I think it was actually in the first episode, we didn't even talk about in this episode, how I was an engineer. Well, guess what? You know what? Our bodies are kind of factories. Our bodies are machines. They do want to be treated in a certain way. Sorry to bust your bubble. Yes, our bodies do have a lot of resilience, but there's only so much it can take. If we think about that whole rubber band analogy, yes, you can stretch it, but at some point it's either going to snap, or the other one would be the slinky one where eventually just you get that edge. And it very similar. Structure, our bodies just run best on structure. And there is in place systems. There are rhythms. And we always talk about the circadian rhythm, which is our rhythm around light, dark sleep. And not necessarily that we are always going to be sleeping as soon as sundown. And that could be a whole other discussion about the research around that and primitive people and how they actually don't go to bed as soon as sun is down. And this has a lot to do with the way melatonin is secreted. But we have this natural sleep-wake cycle. But we have other rhythms. We also have our cortisol rhythm. So yes, we talk a lot about the negative of cortisol. Well, we actually do need cortisol, and it has its own rhythm. Cortisol levels should be normally very elevated upon awakening, and as the day progresses, they should decrease. But you could see how changing the way you do things could actually have an impact on cortisol rhythm. We also have the adenosine rhythm, and that basically, as the day progresses, our body is going to be building up more and more adenosine, basically breaking it down from ATP, which is the fundamental energy molecule.
Doesn't coffee affect, or caffeine affect?
Yes, that's actually how coffee works, because coffee basically blocks the breakdown or the release of adenosine. So that's exactly how coffee works. It's my favorite thing to present on. I find it so fascinating. I find for some reason caffeine metabolism is I love that drug. I just I love studying it. So as the day progresses, our body is going to be building up more and more adenosine, which is going to help us fall asleep. And then, because I study women, women have reproductive cycles, changes with elevations of estrogen the first half of the cycle, hopefully get ovulation, and then we have healthy production of progesterone. All of our key hormones all have different half-lives throughout the day. Our thyroid hormone, for example, if you test someone's thyroid levels in the morning versus later in the day, there is going to be some variation because they have different half-lives. So our bodies are kind of perfect, but the problem is that we don't always treat them well. I mean, when we think about, if, like, for example, a car, we're not going to be doing crazy stuff to our car. We're not going to be like just, well, I don't want to give it gasoline. Right. I'm just going to pour Pepsi Cola in it. I mean, why the heck not? I'm free. I'm free to do whatever I want. Or like, yeah, like, I know it says like I need to get an oil change, but like, what do I care? Or like, who cares if my tires are flat? I'm just going to keep on driving it. We would never even think about doing that for a car, but we will really bend over backwards to just fit all this kind of chaos into our body. So that's just one.
Right?
Right. So, I mean, structure in general, again, really helps facilitate the function on so many levels of our body. And this is also often, I have a lot of patients, specifically female patients, that will follow some of these different dietary ideas that just don't really work well with the female body, unfortunately. It's specifically, we want certain things to be functioning optimally. But then another thing to think about, children, for example, also really like structure. And when they don't get structure, that's when they actually act out. And so actually, in very many ways, structure allows them to feel safe. It's not necessarily a punishment. And even adults very much do require that structure. Plus, if we even think about the sleep analogy, or looking at sleep, I mean, and I've seen this actually in my practice, having very off sleep schedules can affect digestion terribly. I'm actually dealing with that right now with one of my patients, plus also has a really big negative impact on mood. And then we're even, again, like, there's so many studies indicating the negative impact of, say, for example, shift work and higher incidences of cancers.
Yes. And decreased lifespan, in fact, right? Overall, with shift workers, which is scary. It's really scary.
Right.
You know, it's like there's an implied need for structure among human beings, you know. So I think that's good. You know, I'm gonna segue into something else that's of personal interest to me as well as professional, and that is the idea of, okay, I'll introduce it this way. In one of your blogs, you talk about using food as a reward. And so what I can see happening with the isolation is that people's, you know, work reward systems getting completely messed up because just all of our schedules are messed up. People not going to work, people working from home, you name it, not exercising, not eating properly, stress eating, more exposure to alcohol. I mean, wasn't it crazy that where I live, the gyms all shut down, the churches all shut down, people were not being seen by physicians unless it was really important. Personally, I lost a friend who couldn't get a transplant in time because it was not deemed to be, you know, urgent enough, and that was heartbreaking. But all the liquor stores stayed open the whole time. The liquor store stayed open. Yes, I'm bitter about that. Okay, so when you're in seclusion, when you're isolated, you have to self-police, right? And if you don't have structure, one of the dangers is that you can go off half-cocked and mess everything up. And if you expose yourself to things you normally wouldn't expose yourself to, if you don't police yourself well, this is how people, they try drugs, for instance. They try an opioid, they try cocaine, or they indulge more in alcohol. So they mess up their reward system. So I personally believe that a big percentage of what we think is ADHD, especially in children, is an impaired dopamine response.
Oh, and 100%.
Yeah, and Dr. Farrell talks about this in his book, The Boy Problem, and on and on. And I'm a big fan of what he proposes. Also, if you look at depression, in the manifestation of depression and depressed mood, it could be because your dopamine system is messed up because of things that you've conditioned yourself for that you no longer experience. You've changed your thresholds, right? So I personally think this is very, very true. So can you speak a little bit to this woolly mammoth in the room of behavioral modification, self-modification due to isolation? I don't think we've ever talked about this in any other interview. I think this is really important. And what can happen when people don't don't exert some form of self-control or self-discipline chronically if we don't do that. You know what I'm talking about, Ivy. I
know exactly what you're
exactly what I'm talking about.
It's very, very big, and I think there's like there's so many layers to this. And I'd say, first of all, I mean, we're wired to want reward, and that's okay, and we do get to have rewards. But one of the detriments is when we are reaching towards the things that have like a huge, like from either the extreme of like the cocaine or like the chocolate bar or gambling, all these, or alcohol.
Or even let's just say it, pornography. Even pornography, right? I mean, that's a big one that we often don't talk about because you got to be sex positive, right? But this is something intrinsic to the human experience that could be being abused, right?
Right.
So I will shut up and let you.
And it's funny. This is actually so perfect because like I'm doing research for a presentation I'm giving next month, and I was actually doing some research on dopamine release and relationships and bonding. So it's kind of like it's like kind of like a little bit fresh on my mind. And specifically, one of the things when we think about dopamine release is novelty and unexpected reward has a bigger increase. So for example, like if you think that your loved one is going to get you like a pair of socks, and then you end up getting like a car, really big dopamine hit. It's like also very similar, like again, because I'm reading more about these relationships. The novelty of a relationship, definitely you're going to have these higher levels of dopamine. And that's why one of the things also to kind of keep, because dopamine kind of is sort of, oxytocin and dopamine definitely are very much related into this feeling of love, this feeling of bonding. And that's why one of the things for kind of like keeping things kind of like fresh or like keeping the romance alive in relationships is bringing in, even if it's like low levels of novelty, but like certain things of unexpected. That's why lovers give each other love notes, is to basically give their lover a hit of dopamine. So then they'll fall in love with them again.
Yes, but some people also will take that and bring a person in for a threesome, you know, without asking their partner's permission, right? Yeah. I mean, if that's what you're into, then okay, that's another thing entirely. But at the same time, and we can talk about that another day in the dynamic there, because I certainly have certain opinions about that as well. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely a spectrum there of novelty, right?
Yeah, and another big thing too is like, again, like the intensity of the reward, and it is going to be more difficult. I mean, you know, for example, like things are very like opioids, cocaine. I mean, even some because even like when it comes to the food, for example, there are definitely foods, you know, when it's very sweet, very just the properties of the food where you're really getting that very heightened sensory experience, which is producing the reward. But sometimes even the abuse of the substance, like there's something like somebody eating a whole bag of chips, for example, in very rapid succession can also have like sort of like this reward kind of feeling, even though it's even if it seems like kind of like a sick way, like even that's one of the things that they've actually shown in bulimics, for example, that a big influencer is actually low levels of dopamine, and that actually the binges themselves help to is one of the reasons why they do it. Not just even the particular food, but the act itself,
right.
Is going to increase the dopamine. So this is a kind of a mixed thing because again, one of the things, like, because my practice is so nuanced and very patient specific, like if, like, for example, if I was having a patient with any of these kinds of issues, besides the fact that, I mean, me asking them, like, what is it doing for you? But like, what are some of the other things, like, if we're not having, I mean, if we don't like our job, we either aren't in a relationship or our relationship isn't good. If we don't have a lot of other outlets in our life, if we don't have a lot going, I mean, this pandemic is so interesting. I mean, some people, as it's are perfectly fine. Some people are actually even having better experiences than they did even prior to the pandemic for multiple reasons. And then some people just really are not coping well. They see no light in the tunnel. There's nothing really supporting them through the day. I mean, it's actually another. I feel like I'm going all over the place. But even when we think about like some of these rat studies, for example, rats that are very much in isolation, not very stimulating environments, more readily become addicted to different substances, whether it's sugars or whether it's cocaine. But then rats that are in environments that are more interesting, whether it's because they have other, like having more companionship, actually don't get that interested.
You mean like more natural novelty?
Right. So they're kind of, I mean, I guess like there's so many other layers. I mean, there's more enjoyment in life.
Right.
And so, I mean, some of the things, these are definitely things to consider. I mean, there could actually be an underlying biochemical imbalance that is leading this person to be utilizing these substances. It could be temporary, and like that there's definitely some things to find in one's life that's going to be much more positive. The other thing, again, if we're thinking about different types of habits, is there is also this idea. So I know that you had said willpower.
Yeah.
Well, willpower only really gets us so far.
Yeah.
The bigger thing is really actually creating, changing habits, because habits are things that we do automatically. We don't even give it a second thought. And whether it's like, I don't like saying bad or good. I say like less helpful, or I'll say, less productive,
less harmonious,
less beneficial. I usually will even tell like patients, I'm like, well, it's not really very beneficial food. Like it's not really going to help this, whatever we're working on. It's not going to really cause any harm. It's really not giving you anything. It's just giving you some extra calories, whatever.
No, I agree with you. Willpower is definitely a loaded word, and maybe not my best choice, but,
right. It's fine. I feel like it's like something that we all naturally would say. But mostly what it is like, so whether, again, like it's a habit that we just like these are things we automatically do, whether they're good for us or not. They're just, we've developed a neuro pathway for them. Sometimes we have no idea why. I mean, I have I've been actually working on creating a new habit. I'm not necessarily eliminating the fact that I drink coffee every day, and also I have a piece of dark chocolate. But something I've been working on myself is starting the day off with 1 or 2 cups of water. And I've been pretty much consistent with doing that, versus before I would have I still get to have my cup of coffee and I still get to have my piece of chocolate, but I'm starting the day off with water because that's the type of person I want to be. So the idea is that we've already have these loops in our head. And there's a really great book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and he talks I love that book, and I have the other book as well. And basically in the habit loops have 3 different components. It has the trigger, the method, which is basically, or the path, which is like the actual habit itself, and the reward. So all habits have these 3 components. So the method or the path is really the action. So like, for example, the eating of the chocolate, that's the habit. There's a trigger. It could be time. It's 7 p.m. That's when I have chocolate. Or it could be the place. On the corner of such and such, there's a store that has really awesome chocolate.
Oh, I hear you. So, you know what, my choice of the word willpower, I'm going to defend myself here for a minute. So I guess what I would rather have said is we still have to be able to make that choice to set up these conditions, right? To be able to set up the conditioning. Otherwise, I don't like the idea of subscribing to B.F. Skinner and saying, well, you know, we're all just subject to these loops that we've created or inborn with. We're mindless automatons, no better than ants. I went to a consciousness conference back in the 90s, and this is what Daniel Dennett talked about the whole time. And it was just like, really? That's life? Really? No, I don't think so. And so I still do feel that you have to make that leap and that choice. Yes, I want to get better. Yes, I want to improve. How do I go about doing it? To me, that does take a certain amount of willpower. It does take a certain amount of volition and desire to want to change too. So for you to say, oh, okay, look, my chocolate habit's a little out of control. Let's try to calm this down, and let's structure this a little bit better. I'm going to associate it with a reward. I see 15 patients today. I've done this. I get my chocolate at 7 p.m. and I get to go to that store in Manhattan to get my chocolate. This is how I try to manage my work and reward as well. If I do something good, like after this interview, I got to go teach. You got a patient. But after that, okay, do I have something planned? Actually, I'm going to work out. But to me, that's a reward as well. So yeah, so like if you can structure these things in a way that they become habits, that we don't need to try necessarily, that there's an intrinsic reward, then that's the key, isn't it? That's the key. I think this is what and we're in agreement on that for sure. Now,
right.
Sorry, go ahead.
And like one of the things, like, again, like, I think that, there's some habits that are very, very harmful, and they take like more work and like probably some outside help, and like one, like, overcoming a cocaine addiction or heroin addiction. I feel like that's a whole other conversation. But if we kind of think about, if we have a specific health goals, and I belong to this women's business group, and I did like a 1 month, like for a week, weekly like habit building. And so the big thing is like thinking about what are our actual goals, like what do we like, is it, if it's just like the basic of like losing weight or sleeping better, but really different, like what are those habits that are interfering? Because we all have good habits and bad habits. Some of our bad habits really aren't that bad, like, or they're not so interfering with our goals. So that's like a big thing to really kind of consider. So, like if your goal is to lose weight, but you're having like a half a dozen cookies every day, it's probably not going to really work so well. And so that could be a habit to really focus on, of how to change this habit. And because you're still going to have that loop. And so a big part of it is getting curious, which is always fun, and being your own detective. And this is something I always tell my patients. I'm like, I'm not you. I can tell you what I've noticed, but until you actually put some of these things into practice and be your own explorer, your own detective, like identifying what are the triggers around this habit I wish I did not have. Right. And what are some other rewards? Like, again, like if we think about the reward for the cookie, well, this could actually be a different reward for many different people. For some people, it could be escape from boredom. For some people, it is like the jolt, and they're like, maybe they are like a little bit adrenal fatigue then, or they're a little bit tired. There's so many other things you could use instead. Maybe drinking a glass of water, maybe even having a cup of coffee or a green tea. Yes, some people would say those are not, but as far as like, if this person's goal is only to lose weight, that's a better option, and they would still get the same reward that they would having the cookies. Or maybe it is escaping from some emotional pain. Well, maybe instead of having the half a dozen cookies, calling a close friend. Maybe it is time to start bringing out the journal, writing things down. Maybe, again, like if you think like there's so many other things. And so it's like trying to modulate the reward part, and then even possibly even playing around with the trigger. If you keep your dozen cookies or whatever, like in the living room right next to you, you're probably going to be eating them all the time. Maybe they need another home, or you
need to be evicted,
Right. Or if you're always going by that same bakery on the way home, maybe go a different route.
Maybe, yeah, exactly. And this is why I know you said, drug addiction is an entirely different talk, because the stimulus and the reward are so different, because they tap right into these fundamental, the strongest drives in us, right? Even pornography taps into the same drives as drugs, and vice versa. That's why it's so strong. And so what do you substitute that with, right? Like, we're not talking about substituting a cookie here, right? When you're on a high, like a super high. So this is a real tough one, and certainly it's a discussion for another day. That being said, there's still so much I would love to ask you about. Would you be amenable to another interview someday, Ivy?
I love it. I love it. It's so much fun. I love talking about these things.
Yeah, no, it's very clear. It's very clear you're passionate. And one topic I would like to delve more into is women's health and your approach, not just the naturopathic approach, but your naturopathic approach, Ivy Branin, M.D.'s naturopathic approach to women's health and some of the unique issues that women may be challenged by more so than men during the pandemic. I think that there may be some, and I think you probably have some very strong opinions on that as well. And there's a whole area there pregnant with possibility, forgive the use of the word pregnant, but you know what I mean. And I think we're going to wrap it up right now. And I want to thank you so much for joining us. This has been wonderful. And we went from a single interview to a two-part interview. So is there anything else you would like to add very quickly?
I would say, and I think I had mentioned this like in our other talk, that I'm really hoping that during this pandemic, it has been a time of reflection and really a time also to take stock in your relationships, in your health goals, what you've been doing with your health. I think that because of having more things shut down, it really was and still is that opportunity. So if you haven't, I'm really hoping that everyone out there really has taken that time to really have some deep reflections. We don't really get that opportunity very often. I mean, I know I don't.
Thank you, Ivy. I really appreciate that. That's a great insight. And I'm Dr. Sam Dubé, and here on the Etiquette Show, on behalf of the Etiquette Show and all of our viewers, I want to thank Dr. Ivy Branin for joining us today. And we will talk to you again in the near future. So until then, everyone, stay safe, and thanks for joining us on the Etiquette Show. Bye-bye.
Sam.
Oh,